Hey everybody, it is Chris, and on Tuesday of this week, Wizards of the Coast released their latest Unearthed Arcana, and in it we have a new Artificer. There was a lot of people were hoping the Artificer would be in the 2024 Player's Handbook, and it wasn't. However, this looks like a revised version of the Artificer is coming within the foreseeable future. Now, with Unearthed Arcana, this is not an official version. This is a halfway version where we can look at it, we can review it. If we get a chance, we can playtest it, give Wizards of the Coast our impressions and our feedback, and they take that into account. And by the time that it comes out as a published version, it will probably look different than what we're about to look at. Just be aware that what we're going to be looking at today isn't likely what we're going to see in the published version. But I do think it is helpful because it does tell us the direction they're going. We're going to see some of the thought process behind it. If we want to play test it, this is going to give us an idea of what we should expect. And I like to go through these things and really analyze them and compare them to their original version so that we can see exactly what they've changed. And I like to think about those things and think about how they might be abusable, whether I think, how I think it'll affect your gameplay at the table. And then in these videos, share my thought process with you, which I am going to do. So I took a long time going through this playtest and comparing it to the Artificer in Tasha's, and there's a lot here. This is, reminiscent of the Artificer in Tasha's, but I think we're going to have a very different experience playing this version over that one. So let's get into it. So first off, one of my main criticisms of the existing Artificer is that it really hasn't picked a lane. And what I mean by that is, so it's a half caster, meaning it can cast some spells, just like Rangers can, just like Paladins can. But Paladins and Rangers, we kind of understand that these aren't really, mainly spellcasters. They're mainly weapon users that have spells. So they've picked a lane. They are weapon users. The Artificer isn't really a weapon user. There are certain subclasses that are weapon users and certain subclasses that aren't. But there's not enough spell casting left for them to really be effective spellcasters. And then they get some additional features that, depending how you build it, you might be able to work something around that. And I've certainly seen Artificers in play that do okay, but there's certain subclasses that never get taken because they just don't give you anything for spellcasting or for weapon use, and so people don't use them. Now, what they have done here is they have picked a lane. So the Artificer in this version can be an incredibly potent spellcaster. Potentially, I don't know without playtesting, but based on just what I've seen that I can do with it within a few hours, potentially a greater spellcaster than primary spellcasters, at least once we get into tier 3. So we're going to talk about that now. So I'm going to go through the base class, and then I'm going to go through the subclasses. Subclasses are the same 4 subclasses that we have in Tasha's, so no new subclasses here, which is a little disappointing, I guess. I love new subclasses. I love new things. We do get some significant revisions to some of these subclasses, though. The Alchemist, for sure, got a lot, which is great because the Alchemist is what I always figured was the poor man of the subclasses in Tasha's, and so I'm glad to see it get some boosts, and it got some pretty good boosts. And then we did have some revisions to all 4 subclasses, so we will go over those, though that will be the minority of this video because there's so much to go through in the main class that is going to take up most of our time. Now, for people who normally skip to the end to get my overall impressions, I decided I'm just going to put them here at the beginning. So these are my overall impressions of this Artificer. I like the direction they have gone here. I like that they have picked a lane. I like lots of the ideas here, and I think there are some problems. and I will be going over the problems individually as we go through them. But I think there are some balance issues here that I hope are addressed before our final published version. Because I think if they are, I think we have a better Artificer. And I do think that's intentional. They released a video where Jeremy Crawford said, the point here is to give the Artificer, I think he called it a glow up, but ultimately he means give it some power creep, just like we gave everybody else power creep because the Artificer's been left behind. Well, they have definitely given the Artificer some power creep here. There are nerfs. In fact, if I go online right now and look at the discussions about this Artificer, 90% of what they are talking about are the nerfs, but I'm not always against nerfs. Sometimes rejigging things involves making some things weaker and other things more powerful. The things they made more powerful here, they made so much, so much more powerful that I think, I cannot see how anyone could look at this Artificer and think, oh, it's weaker. It is much, much, much more powerful. That's not necessarily true of the subclasses, though. Like I said, the Alchemist got some nice buffs here. The Artillerist was undeniably buffed. The armor, I'm not sure that it's not weaker than it was. You have more options, which is great. In fact, we're going to go over a new option that I think is really cool. But they put a nerf in there that's really tough. And then the Battlesmith as well. I'm not sure it got boosted at all either. Now, I'm of the opinion that the Battlesmith probably didn't need a buff, because part of the problem with the Artificer is that we had subclasses that weren't well balanced against each other. I do think they're more balanced now. Not sure the armor needed a big hit, but we're going to go over it. So these are the core Artificer traits, and for the rest of this video, I will be looking this way because I'm going to be accessing some notes because I've gone through everything and looked for every difference. And this should look pretty similar to what we already have for the Artificer, because, on first reading, the only difference here that I noted was the equipment, which is a minor enough change. I wasn't even going to go over traits at all, but I looked a little deeper and I noticed something that I do think is significant. So in Tasha's it says, if your DM uses the optional rules for firearms, then your Artificer is proficient with them. Firearms are now a martial weapon in the player's handbook, and there's nothing here about getting proficiency with firearms, and we only get proficiency with simple weapons. Now, this might be intentional, though that bit about firearms was separate from these listings in the old version, so it's possible it's just an oversight as well. But this playtest version of the Artificer is not proficient in firearms. That's not anywhere in this document. So on to our first level features. We're going to start with magical tinkering. This feature used to allow you to make some non-magic items into kind of mini magic items that did very, very minor things. Like you could shed light and it was like 5 feet of bright light and 5 feet of dim light. Or you could emit a recorded message, or it would have a little static visual effect on it. Or you could, emit an odor from it. So really minor stuff, kind of a prestidigitation kind of thing. Now what you can do with it is you can create non-magic items from the player's handbook that might come in handy. Like you need some rope, and so you make some rope as an action, or you make a pole, or you make some caltrops. And you can make a number of items equal to your intelligence modifier each long rest as a magic action. And I'm just going to scroll up here so we look at the next column. It says you can use this feature a number of times equal to your intelligence modifier, minimum of once, and you gain all expended uses when you finish a long rest. And it says, see the rules for the item in the player's handbook. The item vanishes after 1 hour. Now, looking at the items that you can create, I definitely think there's something here that's cool, because there's no way your character is carrying all this stuff, and this is stuff that might come in handy in one case or another. Now, if you have a super permissive DM that really, really doesn't care about encumbrance at all, yeah, you could potentially buy all this stuff and have it in your backpack. But, any kind of realism at all, you will not have this stuff in your backpack. And you might need it, right? You never know when you're going to need a bucket, because, you need to bucket some water onto a fire or something like that, or a shovel. And this is stuff that, you won't necessarily have with you. So being able to just create any of it when you need it, definitely I like the idea of that. Not a huge fan, though, of the 1 hour duration. And I think for some of this stuff, in fact, probably even for most of this stuff, 1 hour is fine. You need into that room, you don't have a crowbar, and you need to pry the door open. So you get the crowbar, you pry the door open. You don't need the crowbar anymore, so 1 hour, no problem. But there's things here like bedroll. Well, if I'm going to create a bedroll, I'm probably planning to sleep in it. And so I probably need more than 1 hour of duration for that bedroll. And I'm not sure why they've gone so far limited on that. Because back to our example of the crowbar. Okay, so if that crowbar lasts for 1 hour, it does the job. But if it lasts for 8 hours, that's not really a problem. So I'm not sure why. The short duration, when that does have an impact on some of these items. Things like the blanket, again, if I want a blanket, I probably want it for more than an hour. So I would recommend, I'm not sure why you wouldn't just have them last until the end of your next long rest, right? And then they vanish, and then you can create the new ones. So that to me would make more sense than the 1 hour duration. But I do like this feature because essentially you're going to walk around and you're going to be like a robe of useful items, a living, breathing robe of useful items. There's a fair number of stuff on these things that you just wouldn't expect to have with you, but might come in handy once in a while. And I think that's more useful than the previous magical tinkering, especially if you already have something like the prestidigitation spell, or you're already a rock gnome. You already have that kind of thing where you do these little mini magic effects. Being able to just make useful items that you probably aren't carrying with you at a moment's notice, I think that's pretty cool. So for spellcasting, I'm just got the main chart for the Artificer up here because there's not a lot of change to spellcasting. So the spellcasting feature is basically the same. There is a difference where if you take a long rest, you can change one of your cantrips now. You couldn't do that before. But otherwise, it's the same except for prepared spells. Prepared spells used to be based on your intelligence modifier and your level. Now we have a prepared spells column, and this is in line with all the 2024 updates. So any of the classes that used to have spells prepared based on level and ability score, they now have this column, which is fairly in line with what you would expect if you were preparing spells on your preparing spells the old way, I should say. So at level 2, we're going to get replicate magic item, and this replaces the old infuse item. So replicate magic item used to be one of the infusions you could pick as one of your known infusions. Now the whole feature is kind of like that infusion, except you no longer need the non-magical item to animate. So now you can just create the magic item, I guess, out of raw materials. That said, I do think, for the most part, this is going to end up functioning very similar to infuse item. It's mostly actually just a reorganization of those options. Though at higher levels, they become much, much, much more potent than they used to be. There are a couple nerfs here. So again, we're talking about things that were more powerful and things that are weaker. And a lot of people have been focusing on the things that are weaker. I will tell you right now, replicate magic item is a much, much more powerful feature than it used to be. And at higher levels, almost to an absurd degree. But there are some nerfs. So one of the nerfs is that previously when you used infuse item, that item could be used as a spell casting focus. And now that is no longer the case. And that is going to create a problem if you are wanting to make an artificer that uses a weapon and a shield. Because if you want to use a weapon and a shield, then both your hands are full. And all artificer spells are considered to have a material component. And Warcaster, the Warcaster feat, if you're thinking that, doesn't affect material components. It only affects somatic components, but material components, you need the hand free. You need the hand to be holding the component. and every Artificer spell is considered to have a material component, and you need your tools. So if you have your tools in one hand and a shield in the other, then you don't have your weapon in any hand, meaning you're going to have to figure out how to juggle those around. And when it's not your turn, if you want to cast something like the shield spell, you'll almost certainly not be able to do any juggling at that time. So it's going to create an additional challenge to making a weapon using Artificer if you want to use a shield. If you don't want to use a shield, maybe not a problem. But if you want to do weapon and shield, there's going to be some challenges there, unless your DM hand waves components, which a lot of them do. Now, I will mention that is not going to affect armorers, because armorers can use their armor as a spellcasting focus, so they're fine. But battlesmiths, they don't get to use anything as a spellcasting focus that they wouldn't normally be able to use. And battlesmiths are the weapon users. And so they're the ones where that's really going to be a challenge. Now, up on our chart here, we're going to see we, instead of having infusions known and infusions, we're going to have plans known and magic items. And the number of actual items you're going to have is the same. So it starts at 2, it ends up at 6. The number of infusions known or plans known now is less. So it's going to be basically be 2 more than the number of magic items that you're going to have, which starts out the same. But, previously you generally knew about twice as many infusions as you actually were able to create. And now it's going to be 2 more, even at high levels. So it's going to scale more slowly. I don't think this is an issue. I've played a number of Artificers. I've always found that at higher levels, you have more plans than you know what to do with. And what usually happens is there's certain infusions that you would make that are kind of character defining for you. So, I made the Battlesmith, and they have the hand crossbow, and that hand crossbow is a repeating crossbow. Well, I'm doing repeating crossbow every day, right? I'm not switching it out for anything. So I would always have infusions known that I never made. So I don't think this is, although this is technically a nerf, I don't think it is a notable nerf. One really tiny change, barely notable, but I'll mention it, is previously if your Artificer died, their infusions lasted for a number of days equal to your intelligence modifier, and now it's going to be a D4 days. I don't think that really matters, but it is a little different. So this is the list of items that are available at level 2. And what we are going to see is a lot of items that were part of the replicate magic item infusion before are now just options. Things like the alchemy jug and the goggles of night, etc. So you can just choose them as your option instead of replicate magic item and goggles of night. So just a little bit simpler. What I will mention is when it comes to the magic item plans, so these scale with level. We're going to get better plans at level 6, then at level 10, and then at level 14. Previously, I'm not convinced that it always did scale with level, because often, the plans you picked at level 2 were still the best plans when you got to level 6 and level 10. And that is not the case anymore. Now these are definitely scaling with your level. So this second level list is definitely the weakest of the lists. I will also point out that there used to be an exploit that you could do with the Artificer called, I think they call it Bag of Holding Bombs, right? And that exploit is no longer available. So the old infusion replicate magic item said it could be taken more than once, but it didn't say you needed to select a different item each time. And that meant you could have 2 different infusions that were both replicate magic item bag of holding. And that meant you could make 2 bags of holding. And the idea would be you have your homunculus put 1 bag of holding inside the other, and that creates a 10-foot nuke that, pulls everything into the astral plane. But now every selection needs to be different. So you can make a bag of holding, but there's no way to make 2 bags of holding. That said, at high levels, you will be able to make a portable hull. So the bomb tactic will be available to Artificers, but not till much higher level. Now I want to talk about this one for a bit. So we can create a common magic item, and it says that we can make any common magic item, or we select one of any common magic item, except for potions and scrolls, which indicates to me that they wanted to exclude consumables, which I get. But what I just want to point out is that Tasha's introduced spell rot tattoos, and those are not excluded here. And now I get why they're not excluded, because they're in a source book that's not the Dungeon Master's Guide, and they're not going to go back and reference Tasha's with a current publication. But if you are a DM and you are allowing old material, you might want to consider restricting those as well, because there's just no way the published version is going to mention them unless spell rot tattoos happen to be republished in that source book, which I guess could happen. But I think it's far more likely they'll be excluded from the exceptions here. And so a DM needs to step in and make those exceptions, unless you want your characters to be able to do a consumable first level spell as a magic item plan. Maybe that's not a problem for you. But obviously the intention here is to remove those kinds of items. And spell rot tattoos, I'll just mention, are an exception. Now, there are a number of infusions that were available at second level that are no longer available. Things like repeating shot and returning weapon, they're just not here. They aren't gone, but some infusion level requirements have been adjusted. So at level 3, we'll get our subclass. We have the same 4 subclasses, but they've all had some adjustments, some more dramatic than others. We'll also get right tool for the job at level 3. This used to allow you to create artisan's tools with 1 hour of work that lasted until you used the feature again. Now it allows you to create artisan tools with magical tinkering, meaning you can make them as an action now, so it doesn't take you an hour, and you can make more than one set of them if you like, but they only last an hour. At level 5, we are going to get second level spells, and I want to stop and talk about second level spells because we have to talk about changes to the Artificer spell list at this point. So here are the design notes. They point out that they've added Elementalism and True Strike as cantrips. Circle of Power is added as a 5th level spell, and that's nice. Arcane Vigor, Dragon's Breath, and most interestingly, Homunculus Servant as 2nd level spells. And they mention here that Tasha spells that aren't in the player's handbook aren't here, so you don't have things like Booming Blade or Green Flame Blade. And it says here in a note that, you can still access these spells for the play test. Because when this becomes a published version, it's not going to say that. Or I would be surprised, at least, if it did. So unless those spells get republished as well, which they might, but unless they do, then the Artificer will lose access to those spells once this becomes officially published. So let's talk about the new spell, Homunculus Servant, and this obviously replaces the infusion that allowed you to create a homunculus. So this is no longer an infusion, it's now a 2nd level spell, and it's on the Artificer spell list. And it's a ritual, which means you can cast it without a spell slot. So you do have to prepare it, but you can cast it without a spell slot, and it's not going to take up one of your magic item slots. And that's actually a pretty big buff. A single spell preparation is way less valuable than a precious magic item slot. Another huge buff here is that the homunculus used to require a bonus action to command, and now it acts right after your turn without an action required by you at all. Another huge buff. However, there is a nerf here as well. There's a 100 gold piece material component that is consumed at casting. We will eventually be able to work around this material component so that we can cast this spell without needing the 100 gold pieces, which I will go over once we get there. But that won't be for a while. So at 5th level, when we first get access to this spell, it's 100 gold pieces each time we cast it. Now, potentially you'll only ever have to cast it once. You can create your homunculus servant, and if you keep them out of danger, then it lasts forever. So maybe you only have to pay the 100 gold piece cost once, but just be prepared that if you're sending your homunculus into combat, and I think often you might, then it's facing danger, and it can die just like any of your pets, and then you will have to spend the 100 gold pieces again to cast a spell again. As for the servant itself, it's basically the same as it was before. Hit points are calculated a little bit differently. We get the ability to upcast it. I don't know that we would upcast it. Maybe if we're out of combat and it's like downtime, then we might as well just use our highest level spell slot. But most of the time, I would imagine, we're never going to have a lot of hit points with this thing anyways. So at level 6, the old Artificer got expertise in any tools that they were proficient with. So they could add double their proficiency bonus whenever they used, a tool that they were proficient with. And that's been replaced with Magic Item Tinker. So you get Drain Magic Item. And this allows you to convert one of your replicated magic items into a spell slot as a bonus action once per long rest. You get a first level slot for a common item and a second level slot for uncommon or rare items. And at level 6, it is likely that all your replicated items will get you a second level slot. So it's basically one extra second level slot per long rest. So we're starting to see where they're becoming a little bit more potent as spellcasters, but we're actually going to see it more dramatically when we look at the magic item plans that are available at level 6. So we see here expanded replication. When you learn a plan for your replicate magic item feature, you can now choose from the magic item plans, Artificer level 6 plus table. You can also switch out your previous plan for a level 6 plan, which of course you will do because these are better. So here's where we get armor +1. This replaces infuse armor from the old Artificer. Then there are a bunch of items that were available with replicate magic item with the old infusion, like Cloak of Elvenkind and Eyes of Charming. And then we have the big one. So we can pick an uncommon armor, wand, or weapon that isn't cursed. And this is the one I think most people are going to pick. It's certainly the one I would pick. So a lot of the old infusions are hidden here. So if we go to the end of this document, we're going to see them as new magic items. So things like repeating weapon and repeating shot and repulsion shield and returning weapon, they're now uncommon magic items that are weapons or armor, and that means we can replicate them at level 6. Notably, this also opens up these items as general magic items that the DM could just put into their campaign, even if you don't have an Artificer. I'm not sure, though, that these are your best options for this feature, though, because we can choose uncommon armors, weapons, or wands from the Dungeon Master's Guide. And that might be too permissive. We have some really powerful options in the Dungeon Master's Guide. There's the Sentinel Shield. There's adamantine plate armor. You can just create it. So if your party doesn't have plate armor and you want it, poof, you can have it for free. And it's adamantine, by the way. And the big one, I think, are Enspelled weapons and armor. So each of these, they have 6 charges. So if we select Enspelled armor as one of our choices, and Enspelled weapon as another choice, that's 12 extra first level slots per day. And you can hand them off. So have your homunculus attuned to the Enspelled dagger, and then you can cast 2 spells in a row, and you can concentrate on 2 spells at once. And if you remember, if you look at the 2024 Player's Handbook, a lot of changes were made to kind of protect spell lists. So yeah, the Sorcerer, Warlock, Ranger, and Paladin spells, and they're largely protected from being stolen by other classes in the 2024 Player's Handbook. I mean, they removed them from Magic Initiate as options. They were removed from Magical Secrets as options. They were removed from Book of Shadows as options. And, well, here's what Jeremy Crawford has to say about the Artificer.
And there is no limitation based off, whether you know that spell. Just because that magical item can replicate that spell doesn't mean that you need to know that spell yourself.
No, you pick certain plans.
Yeah.
And then the items you make are based on the plans you know.
Perfect.
Now, I'm not saying this is a huge problem at level 6 when we're talking about cantrips and first level spells, but we're going to be able to access up to 3rd level spells. And I do think I need to talk about this more later. So at level 7, we're going to get Flash of Genius, and we have a change here that I do appreciate. The old version told you that you use the ability when someone made an ability check or saving throw, but it didn't say whether you needed to use it before or after the roll was made. I think most of us played it that was used after, but now it is spelled out for you. So you use it after an ability check or saving throw has failed. Now, this should be no surprise because we've seen it across the board. But, just like everything that can boost an ability check, just note this no longer affects initiative rolls. Initiative doesn't get failed, so there's no trigger to use this. At level 10, we'll get Magic Item Adept. This used to give you the extra Magic Item Attunement and allowed you to craft magic items of common or uncommon rarity cheaper and faster than you used to be able to. The second part has now been split up amongst the subclasses, so we'll talk about it as we get to the subclasses. So now it's just the extra attunement and, of course, access to the 10th level magic items to be replicated. And what you choose now is an uncommon ring or wondrous item that isn't cursed. This is going to allow things like Boots of the Winding Path, Helm of Awareness, Mind Sharpener, and Spell Fueling Ring that used to be infusions. So at level 11, we're going to get Spell Storing Item, and this is where we've reached Tier 3, and the Artificer is going to take off. Okay, so really coming in right at level 11, we're going to get one of the biggest buffs of the class. I would have said the biggest buff of the class, but that's coming. But this is really big. So you used to pick a first or second level Artificer spell, and then you or usually one of your pets would cast that spell from the item twice your intelligence modifier times per long rest. Now you can select third level Artificer spells. This means an 11th level Battlesmith can have their pet fire a Conjure Barrage every round for 10 rounds per long rest. With an Artificer, well, then it's Fireball. With an Armorer, well, then it's Hypnotic Pattern or Lightning Bolt. And with an Alchemist, well, the Alchemist gets the short end of the stick here. So, I mean, they still could do Dispel Magic or Haste, but nothing quite as dramatic as the other three subclasses. Nevertheless, this is 10 additional third level spells every day. Now, when I read Spell Storing Item, I figured I would be saying that it was the biggest buff that this class got, but that would not have been correct, because this is the biggest buff of the class. This is honestly a problem. So at 14th level, we're going to get Magic Item Savant. We get another attunement slot, which is great. You used to be able to ignore class, race, spell, and level requirements on attuning magic items, which was nice. That is gone. But what we get here is so much more powerful. It says when you learn a plan for your replicate magic item feature, you can also now choose from magic item plans Artificer level 14 plus table. You can have no more than 3 rare items created by replicate magic item at a time. So it says you can replicate rare armors, rings, wands, weapons, and wondrous items that aren't cursed. So, now our Enspelled Weapon holds 3rd level spells. 6 of them. Our Enspelled Armor holds 3rd level spells. 6 of them. These can be any spells from any list. And thanks, Jeremy Crawford, now the DM can't even say that wasn't the intention. Oh, and rare wands can now be selected, so wands like, for example, Wand of Fireball. And we get 4 items per long rest. Only 3 of them can be rare, but that's still 3 items. So let's say we are a 14th level Artillerist. So we would get Fireball on our base spell list because it is a subclass spell, and it says under the base class that anything we get from our subclass, any spells we get from features, are treated as Artificer spells. So we get 3 Fireballs from a regular spellcasting feature. We'll get 10 more from a spell storing item. We'll get 6 more from an Enspelled Weapon. We'll get 6 more from Enspelled Armor. We'll get 7 more from a Wand of Fireball, and that is 32 Fireballs per long rest. And we still have another replicated magic item left over. Now, nobody's going to cast 32 Fireballs in a day, because who has 32 rounds in combat to be casting Fireball? Well, we don't need 32 rounds because we're going to be able to cast it multiple times every round. This can actually get really out of hand because there's a loop. And for those who are not aware what a loop is, it's an optimization term. So what we call a loop is when you find that there's a little feature where they made a mistake, and it allows you to do it over and over and over again, stacking the results. And you just can keep stacking them forever. And that's called a loop. And these happen in role-playing games because designers aren't as insidious as us optimizers who think about these things. Now, DMs should never allow loops. Ever, ever, ever. It just destroys your game. And as a player, you should never, ever, ever exploit a loop. But there is a type of optimization that I call theoretical optimization, where we think of these things because it's fun to think about what could in theory be done, even though practically we would never ever do it. So here's what we would do in theory. So we would create an Enspelled Dagger. And the spell we would put in that Enspelled Dagger is Homunculus Servant. Now we might do that anyway, so we can cast a spell without the 100 gold piece material component, which we can now do. But let's say we create our Homunculus Servant, and then we hand them the dagger. And they take their hour to attune to it, and then they cast it. And now they have a Homunculus Servant. And then they hand the dagger to that Homunculus Servant, who attunes to it, and does the same thing. And so the dagger gets passed off on and on again until all 6 charges are gone. So now you have 6 Homunculus Servants until the next day, when we do it again, and now we have 12, and then we have 18, and so on. And here's how it works in combat. So they all have the same initiative as our Artificer does, except they take their turn after the one who created them. So we take our turn, and immediately after that, our Homunculus takes their turn, and then immediately after that, their Homunculus takes their turn, and so on, and so on, and so on. And so just very simply, they could all come up and do their force strikes. So we do our turn, and then our Homunculus goes up and force strikes, and their Homunculus goes up and force strikes, and so on, and so on, and so on. And in theory, you could kill any creature in the game this way. Though that would require a lot of Homunculus on the battlefield that maybe could be wiped out with a single fireball or area of effect. I mean, you don't always want to be sending fragile things into melee, even when you have a lot of them. But let's say we're an Artillerist, and we have our spell storing item, and we put fireball in it. So we take our turn, as normal. Then our Homunculus takes their turn, and they're going to use the spell storing item and cast fireball from it. And then they hand off the spell storing item to their Homunculus, who doesn't need to attune to it, and they cast fireball from it. And then they hand it to their Homunculus, and so on and so on and so on. And so you can deplete your spell storing item in one round. So you can cast 10 fireballs in a row. You don't have to do anything. You can take your action as normal, or you could cast a fireball and now it's 11. So that might be a little much, don't you think? So yeah, loops are problems, and this would be another problem. And as a DM, you should never allow it, and as a player, you should never even force your DM to ban it, because the DM shouldn't have to say no, you can't use loops. You as a player should know better. But even if we don't use a loop, there's a lot of 3rd level spells here, and presumably we're going to have one Homunculus. That's not an exploit, so they can have our spell storing item. Very likely, if we're going to have Enspelled weapons and armor, we'll probably have a familiar, right? Because at some point we'll find familiar in that Enspelled item. So that familiar reasonably could have, maybe an Enspelled dagger. Maybe the Homunculus has the dagger and the familiar has a spell storing item, which, is something more appropriate for, a CR0 beast. If we're a battlesmith, we might have yet another pet with our steel defender. And all of these things are going to have turns. None of them are loops. They're just built into the class. So we could be casting 4 3rd level spells every round. And we're going to have so many 3rd level spells, we're not even going to run out of them very easily. 32 3rd level spells. That's a lot of 3rd level spells. And I was just talking about fireball, but they can be anything. And we can absolutely steal from the ranger and from the paladin and from whoever we want. I don't like that. I gotta say, I don't like that. And I am concerned about it being overpowered. Now, should mention that we do get to a level, like at level 14, We have some really powerful spells available to full spellcasters. They're into 7th level spells. And there's just a few levels, and they're into 9th level spells. Artificers will never get a 9th level spell. So maybe that's the difference, but I don't know if it is. I think being able to cast 4 3rd level spells around and concentrate on 4 spells at once is even more powerful than a 9th level spell, in my opinion. Now, I should, in all honesty, say I have not playtested this yet. And I don't know if I'm going to get a chance to playtest it before their survey is closed or not. If I get the opportunity, I will. But I am concerned that this is a little bit too much at level 14. Oh, and did I mention this is when the Bag of Holding bomb comes back into play, because now we can use one of our replicate magic items to create a bag of holding, and one of them to create a portable hole. So we have one of our homunculi fly up to the enemy, holding each. They take the portable hole, put it down, throw the bag of holding in, and poof, everything goes off to the astral plane. No saving throw. And so I do think even with just the Dungeon Master's Guide, this is already out of hand. And one thing Jeremy Crawford mentioned in an interview is they wanted this to be a feature that isn't future-proofed. That's what they wanted. They wanted it so that the more source books they came out, the more powerful this feature would become. But the thing is when you're crafting a magic item for a source book, like if you were a game designer and creating a magic item, you are thinking of that magic item as, something that the DM might give out or might appear at a certain point in a campaign or those kinds of things. And so now you also have to consider, what if a 14th level artificer just makes this? Or even a 2nd level artificer just makes this, depending on the rarity of the item. Is that something that they're always going to consider when they make these magic items? I don't think so. Somebody's going to make a mistake at some point, and the fact is the more magic items we get in play, the more kinds of abuse will be available. And so I've already shown ways that this can be abused, and this is just from the Dungeon Master's Guide. So I love this in theory. I love this feature in theory. I am concerned about some of the applications of it. Then at level 18, we're going to get Magic Item Master. This is unchanged, same as the old version. And then we get our Capstone, which has had one huge buff and one huge nerf. So everyone's talking about the nerf, so let's get that over with. You used to get a big bonus to all of your saving throws, and that meant you probably had a +6. This stacked with Flash of Genius, so you could basically make all your saves, which is really powerful. That is replaced with a bonus of a d6 on an ability check once per turn. So yeah, that's a huge nerf. Huge. But there is a big buff. The old version allowed you to drop to 1 hit point instead of 0 when you lost all your hit points using your reaction. But each time you used it, one of your infusions was lost. Now you can drop to 20 hit points instead of 0 at the cost of a replicated magic item. But that's not the big buff. The big buff is it doesn't use your reaction anymore. So you could use it up to 6 times between turns if you needed to, in addition to casting a reaction spell. And that actually is a really big buff. Now, I'm not sure I would say this feature is as good as it was. In fact, I'd probably say it's worse, though I am biased towards saving throws. But I think people are so focused on the nerf, they're kind of ignoring the buff. The buff is pretty good. And so I do think that as a capstone, this is not as powerful as it used to be. But it's not bad for a capstone. This isn't a weak capstone. And that is the Artificer. And now let's talk about the subclasses, and this will be faster. I know I've been going on for a long time here. So I'm mostly going to focus on the design notes here. Though there are changes that aren't noted in the design notes, I'll tell you what those are. So we're going to start with the Alchemist, and I got a lot of flack for saying that the Alchemist is weak when it came out. But I gotta say, it's been years and years and years, and I never see anyone play one. So maybe people have come around, but I am glad to say this is the subclass that got the big buffs. I don't know if it's enough, but it's definitely better than it was. Interestingly, the design notes don't even tell you what the 2 biggest buffs are. So we get Vitriolic Sphere instead of Blight. That's an upgrade. We can also craft potions at twice the speed, and that happens right at level 3. You now get 2 elixirs after a long rest instead of 1, but beyond that, the scaling is faster as well. So we're going to get 3 elixirs at level 5, 4 at level 9, and 5 at level 15. It used to be 3 at level 15, and you get these, after your long rest right away. If we look at the elixir table, the healing elixir used to restore 2d4 plus your intelligence modifier. Now it's 2d8. The alter self elixir is now replaced with you choosing which elixir you want. And I do think that's a nice upgrade as well. First off, it gives you a little more control when you are rolling randomly. And secondly, if you did roll alter self before, if you didn't need alter self, then, you wasted your elixir. But here, all of these are ones that are pretty good for most days. Like, maybe flight is a little circumstantial, but for the most part, I could see whatever you roll, you'll probably get a chance to use it and have it be impactful the day you get it. At 9th level, we get restorative reagents, which used to give the creature that drank your elixir 2d6 plus your intelligence modifier in temporary hit points. Now it's your level, which is going to be 9 and eventually 20, plus your intelligence modifier, and so that's better. And it scales. Chemical Mastery used to give you resistance to acid and poison damage and make you immune to the poison condition. You could also cast Greater Restoration or Heal once per long rest without expending a spell slot. Now gives you extra damage on certain spells. This is going to combine with Alchemical Savant, so you're going to do an extra 2d8 plus intelligence damage on qualifying spells. And because of the way Vitriolic Sphere works here, where they take damage over 2 turns, you should be able to apply this benefit twice in that case. Immunity to the poison condition is gone, and instead of Greater Restoration or Heal, you can cast Tash's Bubbling Cauldron instead. Now, Greater Restoration and Heal are both good spells, but Bubbling Cauldron is also a good spell. So I don't think this is a downgrade, and of course, I think it's thematically obviously appropriate. So that's the stuff they tell you in the Alchemist Updates design notes. And here's the 2 big buffs they didn't mention. 1, a creature can drink the elixir now as a bonus action. And that's not surprising because of the changes they made to potions, but nevertheless is a huge buff. 2nd, you can now administer the potion to another creature with a bonus action. You used to be able to do that, but only if they were incapacitated. So now your homunculus can fly around and administer healing, armor class boosts, and d4 boosts to allies using their bonus action. Now, I was reading this, and I do think when I read over the giving it to allies thing, I do think maybe they missed an opportunity here to allow the elixirs to be thrown at willing creatures as a bonus action, and then they get the benefit. But yeah, nevertheless, this subclass has been improved quite a bit. Now, I don't know if it's enough. It might be enough, but this subclass was really behind before, and they get far less potent options for their spell storing item than the other subclasses do now that 3rd level spells are allowed, which I think is an unintentional nerf. It's not really a nerf, it's just an unintentional buff for the other subclasses over the Alchemist. But I do think the gap between subclasses has at least been reduced. Okay, so the armor. So the Alchemist does potions twice as fast. The armor crafts magical armor twice as fast. No surprise. The Guardian and Infiltrator armor options continue to exist, but we have a 3rd armor option, which is the Dreadnought. So here it is. You get a big ball and chain attached to one of your gauntlets that does a d10 bludgeoning damage and has the reach property. You can turn large for 1 minute as a bonus action. I think the idea is that the armor turns large. You don't necessarily inside the armor. So, it's like mechs in Pacific Rim or Battletech or whatever. I think it's pretty cool. You can grow a number of times equal to your intelligence modifier per long rest. And if you hit a creature that is smaller than you with the flail, you push them 10 feet away or pull them 10 feet towards you. Keep in mind that you do not have weapon mastery as an artificer, so this kind of fills that gap. And I have to say, I think this looks pretty cool. With the Guardian, so you used to be able to give yourself temporary hit points as a bonus action a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus per long rest. You can now do it without tracking uses, but only if you're bloodied. And bloodied is the condition you get when you are at fewer than half your maximum hit points. With the lightning launcher, they've added the thrown property in addition to it being a ranged weapon. So it's kind of like the dart, where you are both ranged and have the thrown property. And that means you can stack thrown weapon fighting style and archery fighting style on the same weapon. Obviously, you can't do that just through Artificer alone. You would need to multi-class potentially multiple times or with champion. Now here's the nerf. Armor got a nerf. So at level 9, this used to be the big level where you got 2 extra infusions and you could add them both to your armor. So you could have multiple infusions on the same armor. And they nerfed it. So now you get 1 additional plan and 1 additional magic item, which must be in the armor category. So there's no more stacking stuff on your armor. You just get 1 extra replicate magic item that needs to be in armor. This still isn't a bad feature. It's an okay feature, but it is definitely weaker than it used to be. So level 15, we got a boost. So the Guardian upgrade now includes a small damage increase from a D8 to a D10 for the Thunder Gauntlets. Not a lot, but it's something. The Dreadnought Flail now does 2d6 instead of a d10, and you get a 10-foot reach, and they become huge and get a fly speed when you grow, and that's really good. The Infiltrator kind of got boned here, so they didn't get much of a boost here at all, and potentially not a boost at all. So they do get the extra d6 damage with every attack, which they didn't before, and that's nice. But they no longer get the advantage on the next attack after they hit, which used to basically replicate the Vex mastery. They don't get that anymore, and I don't know why they took that away, but that kind of sucks for the Infiltrator. So I do think the Infiltrator gets the short end of the stick here for sure. As for the armor, I have to say, I think the Dreadnought option is really cool, and I really like it. The level 9 nerf, though, is a hard pill to swallow, so I'm not sure the armor got boosted at all. The Artillerist, though, got boosted. And so just going over the design notes here, they can craft magic wands twice as fast, which makes sense. Here's the big change, and it's super nice. You no longer make a flamethrower, force ballista, or protector cannon. You just make a cannon, and it can do all 3. You just pick the effect when it fires, and that's fantastic. That is a really nice buff. And the level 9 feature has changed. You used to be able to use an action to cause your cannon to explode, and then creatures within 20 feet took 3d8 force damage, save for half, and that was normally a terrible option. Now, if the cannon is reduced to 0 hit points, you use a reaction to command it to detonate for 3d10 force damage, save for half, and this I would actually use. You're losing the cannon anyways, because it dropped to 0 hit points. So if it is beneficial for you to have it explode, and to have your reaction available, then why not? One small frustration for me on the Artillerist playtest is right here with level 9 explosive cannon, because this is something that bugged me with the old Artificer and the old Artillerist, and I was hoping it would be changed, and it's not changed. So it says here that at level 9, the cannon's damage rolls increase by a d8. Why doesn't the Protector Cannon scale at level 9? Why is it only the damage options that scale? Shouldn't the Protector Cannon also give you a d8 extra hit points or something? I think it should. So I'm a little disappointed to see that they haven't included that. Nevertheless, the versatility of the cannon alone, I think, is a great buff for the Artillerist. Okay, time to talk about the Battlesmith. And I'm not, like with the armor, I'm not sure this got buffed. In fact, with the armor, I think it's likely weaker. Battlesmith is probably close to on par. So first off, we can craft magic weapons at twice speed. That makes perfect sense. The Steel Defender got some nice goodies and had some goodies taken away. As for the stat block, there's actually only really minor changes. So hit points are now 5 plus 5 times your Artificer level, and it used to be 2 plus your Intelligence modifier plus 5 times your Artificer level. It is a really small change, but technically probably a slight nerf, like maybe 2 hit points. And speaking of 2 hit points, that's the other change, is the Force Empowered Rend does 2 hit points more damage than it used to, which is nice. That's a little buff. As for the base Steel Defender, it also had a buff and a nerf. So the buff is the Defender now acts on your turn. It used to act after your turn. Acting on your turn is more beneficial, especially if you're using it as a mount. But the nerf it had is you used to be able to heal it with the Mending cantrip, meaning you could heal it for free, and that has been removed. So one buff, one nerf. So I'm not sure whether to say the Battlesmith has been buffed or nerfed. I think it's close. But what I will say is I don't know if I want to use weapons with a Battlesmith, or at least weapon and shield like I used to, because the whole thing about spell components and not using infusions or replicated magic items as spellcasting focuses. That's a problem. Never mind that we have a million third level spells. Why am I attacking with a weapon when I could be casting one of my many third level spells? At least at a certain point. But even at level 6, it's a million first level spells. And when it comes to weapons, the Artificer has lost ground because they did not get weapon mastery. Well, most other weapon users did. Not saying you can't make a Battlesmith that uses a weapon, but I would probably consider dipping something like Fighter beforehand, and then maybe use a two-handed weapon. And then I think it could work. And that is the Artificer. I know this was a long video, but I wanted to go through it in detail and give you my full impressions. And if you would like to give Wizards of the Coast your impressions, on December 24th, that's when the survey opens on D&D Beyond. I'll be filling it out, and I invite you to as well. They tend to say that they want everybody's feedback, whether you get a chance to play test or not. So you can just give them the impressions of what you saw today. And for me, now until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.